Obviously, because of the gauges, they represent the amplification, the allowed amplification, or short way of saying the resistance, the wire, the loadability. I don't know if you see that. The red will be a 12 gauge, the black will be a 10 gauge. In order to understand the difference in the gauges, each gauge is associated with a certain amperage or load capacity, as we call it. So the 12 gauge generally associated with a 20 amp breaker or circuit, and the 10 gauge is usually used with a 30 amp breaker. A dryer will be a 30 amp circuit. So because the wiring a dryer or a condenser for the air conditioner, we use a 10 gauge, which is the black one. Obviously heavier amperage, or able to hold more voltage and amperage, okay? Usually associated with a 240 circuit, okay? The 12 gauge is usually associated with, by code, the different circuits. So in your kitchen, you're supposed, by code, you're supposed to have a minimum of 2 circuits, or both of which should be a 20 amp. We'll get into later on about the 12, the gauge wire of a 12 amp. Because you're supposed to have 2, there's also what we call required circuits, such as your refrigerator, microwave, all of which is supposed to be 12 gauge, okay, which is equal to 20 amp breaker in your panels. So a 30 amp breaker goes with the 10 gauge, a 20 amp breaker goes with 12 gauge, 15 amp breaker goes with a 14 gauge, and it goes up, and the lower the number is, the higher or thicker the gauge wire, more amperage. So an 8 gauge will generally is a 40 amp breaker, and that goes with your range, your stove tops or your stoves, okay? So there it is.